Good evening, I'm Christiane Amanpour and welcome to our program. China is not a country without scandal. It is simply a country in which, until now, the world has almost never heard about scandal. The government maintains iron control, but now China's dirty laundry is on display for all the world to see in a sensational tale of murder and mayhem. In my brief tonight, will this corruption and the very public scandal around it bring political change to China? First, the story. One of China's most powerful political bosses, Bo Xilai, a charismatic and popular leader, has been kicked out of the Politburo. His wife is suspected of having a British businessman murdered because of a business deal gone sour, and there are questions of bribery. The official who exposed the scandal was so afraid of reprisal that he turned himself into the American consulate seeking asylum. Bo Xilai's conspicuous wealth, his son's Ferrari and tales of partying at expensive private schools abroad, all have sparked fury in a country where the gap between rich and poor is dramatic. The entire country is reeling from this public exposure of private wrongdoing. And now, the question, might the Chinese people rise up and put the government on notice? Tonight, I'll talk to one of the most powerful women in America, Nancy Pelosi, on American relations with China, as well as women's movements around the world. But first, the former U.S. ambassador to China and the former Republican presidential candidate John Huntsman on the scandal that is rocking China. Governor Huntsman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Christiane. Honored to be with you.
You were in China during Bo's rise. What did you expect for his future? What could he have been for the Chinese political system?
Well, when I saw the way that he carried out a rather public and high-profile campaign, I use that term loosely, for a position in the Standing Committee of the Politburo, which effectively is the board of directors of the country, the top 9 seats, I thought to myself, this is either the new wave of how one is put in higher office, or it's not going to go over so well.
Which it didn't.
Which it didn't.
Are you surprised by the way he's been so publicly vilified?
This, I think, is a sign of growing transparency within the party, which is a good thing. And I think we need to reflect on the idea that some years ago we never would have seen this. I think there's always a lot of tussling behind the velvet curtain, so to speak, but it's never seen by the rest of the world. This has been very public and very high profile. And I think that's largely due to greater transparency now in China and within the party.
Obviously what it's brought up is this incredible corruption. Now he, on the one hand, tried to portray himself as a crusader against organized crime, against corruption. On the other hand, you're seeing these staggering numbers come out. Some report, it may have been a leaked report from the China Central Bank, said something like $123 billion was smuggled out of the country, by some of the leadership. What is the extent of the corruption, and can this put an end to it or not?
Corruption is endemic and widespread. And if there's one thing that will bring the party down, it will be corruption. And I think the party leadership knows this very well. And so what have they done over the last couple of years? They've made very high-profile examples of corruption cases. If there's one thing you see on the headlines, the front pages of party papers throughout China, it's been recent corruption cases.
Are the Chinese leadership concerned that had they not taken a hard stand, that people would rise up in anger over this kind of corruption or this kind of story? If
you look at all of the uprisings around the country, most of them largely unreported, and there are probably 100,000 or more a year, it's usually due to local corruption cases. Somebody gets away with something. Some local government official gets off scot-free after some.
So this could be a real problem even in tightly controlled China.
This gets right to the heart of the credibility of the party.
They're obviously looking around the world, as you just mentioned, all these uprisings that are going on around the world. Do you think that this could be the China movement, this kind of anti-corruption crusade or anger by the people? I mean, in other words, are the leaders there right now, do you think, really worried that they could be threatened if corruption becomes a real issue and angers the people?
I suspect they're very concerned about how widespread this becomes in the minds of their citizens. And that's why when they look at a country with 600 million internet users and 90 million bloggers, this is something they never had to deal with before. I mean, if you were to take the events of 1989, the Tiananmen Square uprising, May and June of 1989, and if you were to overlay on top of that the power of the internet today versus the nascent form it was in back then, you can imagine how widespread that would have become. So they're well aware that there is this organizing force called social networking technology, and trying to tamp it down to the best of their ability, isolating, containing the Chongqing incident, dealing with it rather transparently, which is unprecedented, and getting it behind them as quickly as they can.
And can they?
Well, there will be lessons learned. There's no question about this. And Xi Jinping, when he takes over, he'll have to consolidate his power after October. It'll take him probably 6 months to a year to do that. And then he's going to have to confront those who are seeking to reform the domestic lay of the land. Politically, those who are seeking greater human rights and religious tolerance, those who want an expression of acceptance for the role of the internet in society. He's going to have to deal with all of these in 2014 and 2015. These are big issues, and they all speak to reform. And my sense is that he will let enough out in terms of reform to keep things moving along without any major crisis or any major upheaval.
And now, of course, what does the U.S. do? How does the U.S. deal with a rising China? Let me play for you something that your former competitor, former challenger on the road, Mitt Romney, said, who's presumably going to be the Republican nominee. This is what he had to say about China.
How is it China's been so successful in taking away our jobs? Well, let me tell you how. By cheating. One thing they've done is they've held down their currency artificially. They also steal our designs and our patents and our brand names and our know-how. And on that basis, they're able to take jobs. And they hack into our computers, corporate computers and government computers, and steal as well. This president has just sat idly by and watched that happen. Oh, he complains. He says he would take them to the mat. But they've walked all over him. If I'm president of the United States, that's going to end. On day one, I will declare China a currency manipulator, allowing me to put tariffs on products where they're stealing American jobs unfairly.
A lot of applause on the campaign trail. Is that sound policy?
Well, it's probably good politics, as it is in China. They bash the United States and they use it to their advantage there. At the end of the day, when somebody's then elected, whether it was Ronald Reagan in 1980, who bashed China, or whether it was Bill Clinton in 1992, who referred to the butchers of Beijing, you then get in office and you say, okay, the reality of the world today is that you've got two countries on the world stage. You have the United States and China. You've got to make the relationship work, despite all the challenges and all the problems. And what Governor Romney mentioned, the litany of crimes, are all very real. And they're part of the relationship that also includes, by the way, some global dimensions that are unprecedented. And if the United States and China don't engage together, the world is a much more dangerous place.
This week you were quoted as saying some of the methods of your own party here, the Republican Party, resembled perhaps a little bit the Communist Party of China. You were very upset that you were disinvited from a Republican fundraiser simply for the big sin of saying perhaps there should be a third party. What did you mean by that?
Well, it shouldn't be blown out of context. My comment was simply that we need a broad-based tent as a party. We need to be inclusionary as opposed to exclusionary. And
do you think it's become extreme, your party?
Well, I think that the tendency is certainly there to begin excluding. And if we exclude, we don't win elections. And we have a very real possibility of winning the election this year. But we've got to make sure that we do what Ronald Reagan did. We ensure that it's a big tent party, that all voices are heard, and all voices are invited to the party as well.
You've also talked about a void of leadership. What do you mean precisely by that? I mean, look, when people saw your candidacy, they thought, oh, that's interesting. It's a very sort of reasonable, sensible Republican voice. Even on climate change, you were saying you're going to hew to what the scientists say. You sort of wobbled a little bit on that during the campaign, and we had a conversation about it. But how difficult is it to take that sensible Republican view these days?
I think the people of this country are crying out for a voice that represents the broad middle, because they're not represented in the early phases of the campaign. But a voice that speaks out with bold and creative and courageous vision. And sometimes the political process waters things down to the least common denominator and takes away any sense of vision or leadership or bold ideas. We can't afford that anymore in this country. We're flat-footed, and we've got to break out with some form of bold leadership. And I think the opening is there for a leader to seize it, and I think within the Republican Party that is a very real possibility, and I hope that that happens.
But the candidate is going to be Mitt Romney, barring some unimaginable intervention somewhere. Is he that leader?
Oh, I think he certainly can be. I think he's got the message on jobs and about economic recovery, which is exactly the issue that I think is going to spell the difference in November.
And at Harvard, you mentioned something about a trust deficit regarding Romney. What did you mean?
Well, I mentioned a trust deficit in the country generally, and that is a nation where our people no longer trust our leaders, no longer trust our institutions of power. And I think this is as corrosive as the economic deficit we face. So putting forward leaders who have credibility and believability, I think increasingly is important.
Everybody is looking at Governor Romney, looking at what he did as governor and the legislation that he enacted and all of that, and then what he's done as a candidate, which is really go to the extreme. Is he able, as you say, to come back to a center that people are crying for?
We'll see. If you sign too many pledges along your political journey, that it becomes almost impossible to do that. I think he does have the leadership ability. I think he's got fundamental knowledge and a track record as it relates to jobs and understanding of how the economy works, where he can put forward a credible and a legitimate message. But we've got to have a system that promotes widespread participation from the very beginning. The exclusionary caucuses and primaries that don't encourage our young people to get out when it's their country they're about to inherit doesn't get us to where we need to be.
Governor Huntsman, thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Great to be with you.
Thank you. And with China on the rise, the United States on the decline, as some people say, we'll get another perspective from one of the most powerful women in America, Nancy Pelosi, and also her unique view of the changing role of women in an ever-changing world.